All right, ready to go? Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Lori Smallwood. I'm the chair of the DEI interest group here in the AOUSD, and I'd like to welcome you to our very first guest speaker event. We'll be hearing from 3 graduates of the WPP Apprenticeship Program. This talk will be recorded and uploaded to the AOUSD YouTube channel, which is open to the public. There will be a Q&A after the talk, so if you have questions, please drop them in the chat and I will help moderate and relay your questions to the speakers. And now I'll hand it over to Perry Nightingale, who is going to tell us a little bit more about the WPP Apprenticeship Program and introduce us to our speakers.
Perfect. Okay, cool. If we could have the slide up, that would be cool. So I founded the WPP Apprenticeship Program about 4 years ago with my colleague Kat Sullivan. I'm the head of creative AI for WPP, and I had to spend the first year explaining to people what that was. And, began working very, very closely with NVIDIA, which led me almost straight away to the Alliance for OpenUSD, for which WPP has been a member for a number of years. But what I realized 5 years ago doing those experiments, which is still true today, we really need humans to get the best out of AI. So I actually thought, instead of just saying that and writing it in blog posts on LinkedIn and doing articles about it, I'm going to go out, I'm going to hire some amazing people. So I took half the R&D budget and I spent it on a secret school in the basement of one of the offices, which has now grown to over 50 people, three of which are on this call today. So I just want to go to the first slide. So whilst I'm talking, I just want to sort of show the video of some of their work, right? So it has no sound, but I just wanted to share that 5 years after we started that program, what we've realized in AI today is that it's a combination of prompting, like these are prompted animals you're seeing here, which are flawless. Unless I told you, I think you'd have thought they were real. You're mixing those with node-based workflows. And then we're doing tons of work at the moment in robotics. So we've had a robot at WPP for 3 or 4 years, and the team you're going to hear speaking for the rest of this session are actually, robot engineers. They work with Atlas for Boston Dynamics, this amazing shoot we did where Atlas is holding the camera spot. We filmed the TPU for Google a few weeks ago in their labs. And you're combining that not only with the generative AI, but also with 3D. So these are OpenUSD digital twins being used as reference images. And all of that gets put together by these amazing people that we have and assembled into content. It's really not people prompting, it's actually a highly sophisticated set of skilled engineers. That film was made for International Women's Day to celebrate the fact that over half the program are women. And we opened we didn't run it as a diversity program. What Kat and I set out to do is remove all of the traditional barriers to coming into this job, right? And I love robotics and I love OpenUSD. I love advanced 3D and I love VFX, but it has been a traditional challenge to reach out to the maximum number of voices to make that type of work. So we really paid attention to removing the barriers to coming into the role. And we got this incredible group of talented people whose work you just saw. I mean, we have Apple, Pixar, on the Met is on this call. I'm proud of that work. That is world class. And you're going to get to meet three of the amazing people behind it on this call today. So, Una, Bami, Xenia, this is your floor. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Just gonna share again. Yeah. Hello everyone. Just gonna hide this again because this is annoying. Yeah. Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Xenia. I'm a creative technologist at Hex, which is WPP's own kind of studio where we do all sorts of stuff from creative coding to robotics and generative AI and advanced 3D, as Perry mentioned. And I'd like to show you a bit of my journey on how I started off with 3D and how I ended up as a creative technologist. Because before that, I started my career as an illustrator, and for a majority of my life, I thought of image making in the kind of aspect of, 2D planes. So essentially, not having, 3D background. And for me, it's always a funny story to tell because it's really kind of shows what I'm gonna kind of talk about a bit later on in the presentation. But my journey with 3D had a very rocky start because when I was around maybe like 16 years old, I joined these kind of digital design and art prep for kind of like middle high schoolers, and we had great introduction to various tools like Photoshop, even traditional drawing, and then we had started a 3D unit, and that's where my kind of understanding on how to produce images kind of like crumbled apart. And I remember really finding it hard to navigate around 3D space, and the way the program was taught was just really, really boring for me, essentially. So I just decided to drop out entirely from that course, and I swore to myself to never touch 3D again, which is very funny, speaking about it now. But then when I joined my university, where I studied illustration and visual media, I've realized that more and more people start to pick up 3D, and that's how I discovered Blender. I essentially rediscovered Blender and 3D for myself, and I decided to give it another go, kind of give it another chance. And since then, I just fell in love with the process of 3D. Of course, it was quite complicated, that initial stage and phase where you get into it. But then once I got a grasp of how 3D operates, I started to apply my own style into creating imagery, creating animations, AR effects, and so much more. And when it came to my final thesis, I realized that I want to circle back to that moment, like 5 or 6 years ago, when I dropped out of that course, and what really made me drop out of it. And that's how I wrote my dissertation on representation of women in 3D and why fewer women choose to pursue a career in that sphere. And one of the discoveries I found was actually, the lack of kind of the course system and the structure wasn't really catered to the interests, to the way sometimes women pursue education, and it was very, very skewed, kind of narrowed perspective. So when I joined Creative Technology Apprenticeship, I realized that it actually doesn't have to be this way. And it was just an amazing time surrounded by individuals with diverse backgrounds from various countries and from various experiences, just kind of come together and really push our boundaries and what we can do both individually but also as a group. And another fun thing is every time a cohort of the Creative Technology Apprenticeship graduates, we got to teach at least one workshop to the new cohort. So after that, I realized that I really, really like teaching in a fun and engaging way. And I think that kind of circles back to my dissertation and what made me kind of miserable at that 3D course. So I really started to explore the ways of how we can make this workshop interactive and fun. And as you can see, I did beyond just one workshop. It was the Blender, Substance Painter, Roblox, and hair particles, and so much more, which is very, very fun. And just a little bit about some of my first experiences with USD, because that was my first time actually using USD at the apprenticeship. This is my character Gleam that I created from scratch. I textured, rigged it for the first time ever, and also it could speak and respond to my questions. It had personality and biography, and it could it had knowledge about other people's characters, essentially. And that was my first experience interacting with USD, and it really made it seamless to move my character from, say, NVIDIA Omniverse, where I had to add realistic lighting, to audio to face, where I could make it talk, and to Blender as well. And for me, a full circle moment was actually being invited as a guest speaker with Perry at Adobe Substance Days last autumn, which was very, very exciting. But now going forward to how we apply USD, my colleagues will show you many other ways, many very exciting ways. But one of them is digital twins and how we maintain product consistency, because of course, having those digital assets really help to produce both VFX, products which include like gaming, virtual production, and so on. So as you can see here, it can be a Coca-Cola bottle or it can be a soap bottle, really anything. If we have a digital twin, it's usually a USD file, and we can seamlessly move it across various software. So in this case, I prepared a little kind of process video of one of the scenes I produced for Substance Days as well, featuring like a soap bottle product, and we used USD to move these assets across Substance Painter and Omniverse and Blender, which was very exciting. And another very huge area for us is generative AI and creating custom pipelines, because as you know, generative AI on its own isn't that great. So combining it with 3D and giving it that actual kind of great reference really increases the quality of the output. So in here you can see the deodorant product line. This is without any references whatsoever, so AI kind of just imagined what it would look like. So we created a custom pipeline that involved a digital twin of the product that was sent by the team, and some references for the kind of feel and look from the art direction point that we want to show. And this was the final result that was approved within like 24 hours by the client, and it went live on Google Cloud blog post with the release of their newest model, Nano Banana. So yeah, as you can see, the possibilities of kind of combination of AI, digital twins, 3D, it's just limitless. So I'm gonna pass to Una, who's gonna talk about the robotics sides of it, which is very, very exciting.
Thank you, Fania. Hi, everyone. I'm Unali, also a creative technologist at PEX. So before joining CTA, my background is in industrial design and creative computing. So in industrial design, I work extensively with tools like SolidWorks or Keyshot, where my work would involve around more mechanical and mathematical 3D modeling, where precision is the key matter of when I do 3D. So the form itself and the visual itself would also matter, but it had to be engineered into like accurate dimensions and like hard surface and real world visibility. And as you can see on the right hand side, when I was doing creative computing, the approach was quite similar, but it got extended to area of 3D printing. So still strong focus on accuracy, scale, and like if it's efficient to print. But then I joined CTA, and I got the same brief as Senya, which is to create your digital twin. And while I was like exposed with very diverse group of people of like what kind of like other skill set that is available on like creative tech and 3D, I kind of wanted to like push myself less technically and more visually, which is like the opposite of what Senya pushed herself. So I wanted to push myself that way. So this was my first project in the world of NVIDIA Omniverse and the world of USD. So instead of like taking a stylized or abstract approach, where I personally thought, because I'm not a visually amazing 3D person, for me, what looks the hardest was realistic humans. So I kind of like pushed myself to do that. And essentially I wanted to like clone myself in a very like realistic human way. So my idea was to capture a 2023 version of myself inside Omniverse using USD. And that the three main focus that I wanted to do is that the digital twin that looks like me, and thinks like me, and speaks like me. So the look, I used took a bunch of photos of myself and actually modeled myself inside Blender and put it into Unreal meta-human, so it has like realistic skin texture. And also Senya taught me how to make a hair particle for my first time. So I made hair particles and merged everything into a USD file. And then the second part, I wanted to have my digital twin to have an eye and a brain. So I had a webcam set up so that it takes a photo every time I use Google Cloud Vision to like analyze the photo of like what it's looking at, and then put that information into a large language model so that it has a brain that thinks. And also my mouth, how I speak. So I cloned my voice too through 11 Labs, and then I put every single bit into NVIDIA Omniverse 4D2 Face. So it's a USD, I put a USD 3D file and my voice APIs and everything, and then it would actually mimic the facial movement dependent on the audio that it's playing. So as a result, that project kind of like blended my interest technically, but also the new challenge of like visually pushing myself, trying to get that like visual realism and digital human. And I could, so as a result, I could actually talk to my 2023 self like that in the video on the right side.
How do I look?
Oh, fantastic. Your black layered hair with those bangs adds a spark. And that house play, it's like a joy-filled event. Every step, every eyelash, and that Heim cut, just spreading plant-like smiles.
After that, now I joined Hex, and how I'm mainly using USD, as Senya mentioned, is robotics. As a creative technologist, I have various projects like campaign automation, games, agent building, and R&D, and a bunch of client works. But what truly blends my industrial technical designs background to creative technology is, I think, robotics. And we have been using NVIDIA Isaac Lab and Google Majoko to train robots using GPUs. And the main form of 3D file for reinforcement learning in robotics is USD. Because on the contrary of like other form of 3D file formats, USD actually can add the rigid body data and articulation, all the joint information and force information, and the DOF, degree of freedom, and all the physics parameter, and all the small custom made metadata, which is like rewords or sensor system and everything. That's why a lot of like major two reinforcement learning software like Majoko and Isaac Lab use USD as a main 3D file format. And a lot of people actually ask us this question, like, why does an advertising company have a robot? And we have two reasons. We essentially advertise NVIDIA GPU and Google Cloud servers as part of the bigger partnership that WPP has with Google. And here's a launch film that explains a little bit further.
WPP is a pioneer in the field of creative robotics and is now working closely with Google Cloud and Unitree on a new generation of humanoids. Reinforcement learning has transformed the robotics industry, teaching physical AI to adapt and respond to the real world through billions of physically accurate simulations in NVIDIA Isaac Lab. To scale these new workflows, Google Cloud is launching the G4 VM, bringing a powerful cloud-based NVIDIA solution for robotics simulation with the latest NVIDIA.
Yeah, and the second part of the reason is that WPP production is a big part of our business. So we're innovating how the future of film production would look like. And as part of that, we have a robot dog called Spot that we custom built with a Sony 8K camera that goes into places where humans cannot go. And last month, we actually went to Google to shoot their new TPU launch film. Next slide, please. Yeah, and with those two reasons, a few weeks ago, Hex was part of Google Next, showcasing the potential of how physical AI can be trained in the cloud. And here is the recap of that event.
It's also powering physical AI, like our special guest Spot.
Spot is a marvel of engineering from our partners at Boston Dynamics. And what makes this Spot so special is that he's been custom built for high-end videography and trained entirely within Google Cloud.
That is so cool. All right, between
Yeah, one moment that really stayed with me happened at Next. It's that right before I took the photo on the left where I'm like weeing and have a snack on my it's actually to celebrate that I just fixed Spot because I had like something was broken and I had to like crouch down and I was like screwing something on Spot and someone was like walking past by and I stopped and said like I have to say this to you. Like, I love that you are the one behind this. I think that comment really like caught me off guard, and because before I wasn't really aware, but I suddenly kind of like became very aware that I was like in a room full of senior decision maker of like next era of cloud engineering, and I was there like right in the middle fixing Spot. And it kind of like reinforced something that is very important to me that I think also Hex kind of like represents too, is how important and valuable it is for people like us, like young, diverse, female creatives and engineers to have spaces to access like these events and spaces and areas where innovation actually happens. So not just to like see what's being announced or not just to get heard or told what's next. We actually get chances to be there and like talk to people and inspire them and be right in the middle of the conversation where actually the future of the next generation of systems actually come together in practice. So yeah, I wanted to end my talk with that note, and that's all from me. And I'm gonna pass to Bami.
Thanks, Una. Hi, everyone. I'm Bami. I am the third and final creative tech from WPP speaking today, and I'm sat within the basement that Perry mentioned, where we all kind of got our training. And yeah, my day-to-day kind of revolves mostly like mixed reality, AR kind of developments, and dealing with some computer vision / spatial computing applications, mostly in the branding space. But I think the coolest thing that I always say to people about our job and what we do is like the vast range of backgrounds we all have and the sort of depth of experience that means that we get to work with every day. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here and grateful that spaces like this exist. And I guess before I get into sort of how we use USD in my daily workflow, I thought it'd be nice to give a bit of an overview of how I got into 3D because it's obviously very different from my other two colleagues. So actually what you're looking at here is a screenshot of The Sims 3, which came out in 2012, I think, or 2010. And I believe I was 14 at the time. And I can definitely remember spending weeks and weeks and weeks just building houses and furniture and decorations for my Sims. And it was the first time I ever really I think that was my first engagement with Yes 3D because I didn't do that much kind of gaming when I was younger, but it was also the first introduction I had to an open source community and like meeting kind of, reading forums and seeing threads and meeting people online who were kind of sharing how they were working with making all their mods and stuff like that. And I think I remember that what gave me the most joy out of building all of this stuff in The Sims 3 wasn't actually doing the building blocks. It was as soon as those designs were done, seeing my avatars, characters, what have you, like interacting with the space that I made, I think that really was what kind of lit a spark in my mind. And I think that sort of idea of movement as the realization of my design language is something that's definitely followed me throughout my career in various ways. So after, obviously fast forward a few years, I think I was a first year student in university taking a course called City and Cinema, where you were kind of looking at set design, architecture, and the role that it played in early to contemporary film. And so this is a clip from a film called Metropolis, which is, I think, from the 1920s, late 1920s, by a filmmaker named Fritz Lang. And the sort of backdrop is class struggle sort of dystopian setting where you've got your underclass that's kind of trying to like come together and revolt against the overlords who literally have a different sort of scale of life. And it was my first time really seeing architecture used as a narrative device, like as well as just being sort of in the background. It's also quite central to the plot. So for instance, on the next slide, we'll see like you see these grand like skyscraper designs and stuff that physically split apart these two sort of sects of society. And for me, I think seeing that architectural backdrop as being sort of diegetic and being narrative driven really, again, was like, mirroring that idea of, okay, there's movement, there's life. It's not just a static sort of thing that we throw up in the air. And so also one of the things that this film was so revered for was its use of practical effects. So like, as you can see in the background, I don't know if it's super obvious, but they're using physical models that they mix and play with a lot of like smart fancy camera work. And then they also have, like 20,000 human extras. And so for 1927, I think this was pretty cutting edge. And I think that mix of the physical and the digital really sparked something in me and actually inspired me to switch my major in my first year of uni and study architecture. And so this is a clip that I really wanted to include because although it's not like a final design of anything that I did, I think this is one of my first studios like intro to orthographic drawing, I think. And we had one brief, which was basically draw everything on your desk in an hour. And I remember when we all had to pin up our final sort of drawings, I really wanted to just pin up the time lapse, like this video on my phone rather than the drawing, because I think it was so much more interesting to me, like looking at my decisions in real time and understanding like how the marks on the paper that I was making were related to each other as I went on. So yeah, again, just that theme of motion underpinning a lot of my work has persisted. And so after graduating uni, I started trying to find a design language that made sense in that way. I played around with Three.js, I did a bit of processing, a bit of Touch Designer. And then I found the apprenticeship where the module that really stuck out to me was Intro to Game Engines. And there we were introduced to this beast of Unreal Engine. And that was a tool where I think for the first time you were able to combine 3D, you were able to combine narrative, you were able to combine interaction, motion, all of these things that have been like bubbling around in my head. I could bring it all together and, in one huge software. And so the GIF that you see on the left is actually one of the first projects I ever made in Unreal Engine. It was a collaborative project. So there were 3 of us who were making this interactive music video where the idea was we were going to make it sort of gamified. So you had to drive this car. That's an actual recording of me driving really badly. You had to drive this car through different obstacles. And I was working with one person who was more of a world builder and one person who was more of a, I guess, akin to the 3D side of things. And the big thing that I learned doing this project wasn't just like how fun it was to kind of program all the interactions and stuff. It was really about learning how to optimize for real-time performance because it's all good and well to have this beautiful world that you've built up with 20 million triangles or what have you. But as soon as we tried to combine everything together, the frame rate was like 4 frames per second or something. And, it then, I think, introduced me to the reality of working in a commercial, working in a production setting where it's like, you have to constantly balance beauty with performance. And I think that, the apprenticeship was such a great space to learn how to navigate those kinds of things, while also still learning and, having the opportunity to make mistakes. But so moving on from that, the slide on the right is kind of the commercial application of those lessons I learned in the apprenticeship, where again, keep sticking with the automotive theme because we obviously have a lot of automotive clients. But this was one where I did some of the camera animation work where we exposed this scene via pixel streaming so that there was an underlayer where the user would have a conversation with an AI chatbot, and those responses would then dictate what angles or what animations the cameras were taking. And the reason that I pointed out that this entire thing was, pixel streamed via WebSockets and then added a UI layer on top is because, again, speaking of that, performance nature, obviously, if we were going to demo this live, we wouldn't be able to just show up and be like, okay, here's my ThinkPad, open up Unreal. Like, you kind of have to add a bit of shine to it in order to really sell this as an idea to a client. And I think one really cool thing that came out a few months ago was the Cloud XR development, which is still this idea of streaming, a scene, but if it's really complex, you can stream it from a remote computer to, let's say, an XR headset. So I guess just to wrap up, this is in line with the idea of using kind of XR headsets. This is a recording filmed on the Apple Vision Pro, which I think is also part of this like OpenXR, OpenUSD movement. And one of the things that I wanted to point out from this one is that we were trying to figure out how to bring certain pieces of equipment that wasn't necessarily available all the time to a specific client, trying to figure out how we could digitize these things and bring them into, let's say, a Vision OS application. And so one of the things that we dove into was photogrammetry and this idea of taking, 300 pictures of a single model and then turning it into a 3D model and then bringing that 3D model into the digital space. Vision OS actually only takes USDZ files as their input models. And so we were essentially, through an iPhone and a few lines of code, we were able to get models similar to this one. This one we didn't exactly photograph, but we were able to get models similar to this one, bring it straight into Vision OS, and then, essentially it was kind of like plug and play, and it was super easy. And I think I went into this feeling a bit daunted because, as we probably all know, like bringing a single model into something like VR XR can go great or it can go completely wrong. And so I think that having that standardization just makes it a lot more accessible for people who might be new to this technology, to just jump right in. Because one of the benefits of doing this photogrammetry process was because we had a client who not only wanted us to make content, but they also wanted to be able to make the content themselves. So the sort of workflow that we introduced them to was taking a bunch of pictures and through a few lines of code, then having your 3D model. And again, like not having to teach them about what an OBJ is or how to bake your textures, like having all of that kind of packaged into one compressed USD file just made it a lot more accessible for them. So yeah, I think it's been a real pleasure to be able to share some of the work that we have done today, and just want to thank you all for your time and let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you all. That was fabulous. Really cool to see all this great work. Any questions from folks? I have one to get us started. So I'd like to hear about this both from Perry's point of view and from the panelists. Like, Perry, you talked about removing traditional barriers when starting up this program. What does that mean? Can you give us some insight as to how you did that? And also, like for the panelists, like what did it look like? Did WPP reach out to you? Like what did that look like from your end? How did it feel?
I mean, we were just super inclusive with the hiring practice, and we had men and women conducting the interviews, and similarly the whole program was taught with a very sort of healthy mix of men and women. I also have had, at the time when I set this up, deeply naively, no idea how visas worked at all. So like we just were very open in who we took into the program, which I realize now a little bit why that happens less than you would think, but it's such a superpower of this course to have so many different voices, and just sitting and hearing that, them talking around the table, particularly about food, was just a pleasure. And like, I think especially with art and design, mixing different styles and different cultures and different backgrounds together is really important. From the inclusive hiring, you've definitely the wording and where you look and how you interview are really important. And I know, Laurie, that the DEI homepage, for AOUSD, and ASWIF has good examples of the way language can work. But I hope it was good to be on as well. Like, please say nice things about it, panelists. But yeah.
Sorry, Senia.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and just reiterate, but I think for me, because this is like my first job, for me it really felt like a continuation of my university experience, where I also met a lot of people with diverse courses, but also a lot of international students, and we also kind of like shared the culture, shared our stances on different software, on culture. And I felt like the apprenticeship was like a really nice kind of soft launch into the the real world. And definitely I learned a lot about the best food from Una.
We do talk a lot about food. Yeah, I wanted to add like similar to Finia. I had other jobs before WPP, and it was accidentally very like a direct competitor of WPP. And I think during my university, I had similar like very diverse group of people like who just moved to UK, and like we could share different cultural like knowledges and like open up conversation. And as soon as I entered the industry, I realized that kind of like that ideal world kind of pauses in a lot of the industry, especially creative industry, that like for realistic reasons like these, that was just totally understandable. But it kind of like paused and like kind of like but when I joined Hex, I felt so much like kind of like home in a way that everyone's very open, everyone's willing to listen, and everyone, like, very importantly, doesn't get offended because everyone understands each other. Everyone's like so diverse, we have nothing in common. That kind of makes it you're open to listen to the other person. Like not just cultural wise, but also skill wise. Everyone's think differently. Like everyone's core skill is so different, but we respect each other's culture and skill, that we collaborate kind of like in a best way, I think. Yeah, what do you think, Bonnie?
I think a huge part of that has to do with, to Perry and Kat's credit, how the application was framed. Like there was no technical requirement. No, you didn't have to know how to code. You didn't have to know how to use any 3D software. The only requirement was be creative and have, I think, 3 projects that you could that you just really loved and that represented who you were. Because I think I probably wouldn't have applied if there was a coding challenge or something, because I was very hacky, not very well versed in programming whatsoever. And I think a lot of those times it's disheartening to think, okay, yeah, this is an entry level role, but we want 6 years of experience with C++ or whatever. Being actually honest about or just being open to teaching us and having the time and space to make those mistakes and learn from the ground up was it was just such a beautiful and a blessing thing. And I think that then meant that you'd get people from, people who studied biotechnology, people who did games design, people who did fashion, all of these people I get to work with every single day. And I feel so lucky for it. So yeah, thank you, Perry.
There was two things we really wanted to tackle as well, which were issues we saw with the world of internships, right? So one, we called it an apprenticeship really deliberately because, we didn't like grad scheme because it implied you had to go to college, and we didn't like internship because, it's an apprenticeship, you're learning, right? You're learning skills from people. So we fought really hard to call it an apprenticeship. But two things we noticed were problems with internships was that, one, they were tended to be underpaid. And so, it heavily lent itself to people who could afford to send their kids to work for free in London. But the other thing we noticed after years of working with programs to get people internships in organizations is that there's a big divide between people who have connections at the company and people who don't. And in particular, if it's a client's child or the child of a senior executive sitting the internship, the opportunities they get given when they're there are very different. And, they'll often get put on the largest pitches or given the most interesting pieces of work. Whereas people who come in, without those connections, often, it's very hard to walk up to a senior person's desk and say, please, can I have this? So, we basically decided we would pay well enough for people to work and live in London, and we would find the coolest things in the companies for them to do. And that's where, Nvidia were amazing and Epic were amazing. And then L'Oreal and Coca-Cola came on board and Google. And, basically the whole industry came together to give this group of people the coolest work to prove themselves. And they repaid it by creating amazing work. Just the most amazing work ever. But that, I think, is really crucial, that if you're going to run one of these programs, you have to give the coolest work to the people who deserve it most, right? And that was a real mechanic that we engineered, particularly with Coca-Cola and L'Oreal, which we're really proud of.
That's great. Yeah, just one quick follow-up. You had mentioned using non-traditional channels to kind of seek out people with different backgrounds. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what might people take away that would help them in their own recruiting efforts?
I mean, I will give a shout out to Google's program with D&AD called Shift, which is eligible for people who have not got a college degree and are looking to get into the creative industries. And Google and a number of partners, I think Adidas is another one, will set them briefs. And they were outstanding, our Shift candidates, 1 year in particular. So I think it's well worth seeking out, the whole, many large creative companies are looking to solve this challenge, right? And they have programs. I mean, you have the Orchard, Laurie, and stuff. There are programs, right? And some, like Google's, you can tap into. So I will say the D&AD Shift program was amazing. And then also, you just have to sort of go out and talk to young people. Ultimately, some people came and said, we saw you at the talk. That's one of the key mechanisms, I think, to go out and find them. If I had one, not say regret, but we have skewed towards, further and higher education. That, given how amazing the shifters have been for us, I think I'd love to reach out to, past the universities and colleges, because they're the traditional place you go. And I will say as well, like a little learning we've got, colleges and universities are very good at teaching students to make portfolios, and end of year shows especially lend themselves to amazing portfolios. And it took a few years for us to realize that, oh, this person has been crafting this for 9 months, and this is their show, and someone's trying to compete with that, Bami, to your point, right? Who, they're thinking the other way. They might be a coder, who's working in a bank or something, and they really want to get into the creative industry, and they think, oh, I'll never be able to do it because I don't have this show at Central St. Martin's. And so I think definitely want to sort of widen our approach a bit going forwards.
No shade to banks, of course. Banks are great.
They've been our best. I've got to be honest. Like, it's the surprises that are so brilliant, right? Like some people have amazing prompting abilities you didn't know they would have,
Awesome.
I was super impressed with all the presentations. It's really amazing. Just wanted to say, definitely worth signing in.
Thank you.
Yeah, feel free to jump in, anyone. I don't think I need to moderate. I don't think the group's so big that we need to put it in the chat. So I do have one other question. So as you folks were working with USD, was there any situation where you felt like, oh man, USD doesn't do this and I wish it did? Or I wish there was some sort of like standard that could be applied, or maybe like a new schema that would work a little bit better in your situation. Is there anything you can think of?
Up until very recently, splats.
Ah, yes.
So yeah, you read my mind with that one.
If USD works perfectly out of the box too, that's awesome.
I think I've also encountered, like, I suppose when you use kind of third-party plugins to convert, like to create the USD, I'm mostly thinking about like the USD Composer plugin with Unreal Engine, like the bridge between Omniverse and Unreal Engine. I think naturally when you use like third-party plugins and SDKs, there's a bit of friction, but I think sometimes when you're asking, a dedicated sort of software that has its own proprietary format to export it out into USD, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And I haven't really figured out when, like, what the secret sauce is to get that working. But it's never like a huge blocker where I can't eventually get to the end. It's like, okay, I'll just go through a different format to then eventually get to USD. So, I think you can't really blame third-party people for what has been set in place that does actually work most of the time.
It's got a lot better over the last 3 or 4 years. But I mean, like the first cohort where we're like, there's this thing called USD. It's gonna be really big one day, and you're gonna need these 600 connectors and this thing called Omniverse, and we're gonna sort of go backwards and forwards. Like, I noticed, 2 or 3 years ago or 2 years ago, a real shift in native adoption of USD. And I think native adoption is really important. It kind of has to be it's very important for it to be inside the tools because third party real third party connectors or Nvidia trying to hold a big bank of connectors that's even more friction. So I think the more it gets adopted, the easier that will basically become. Yeah.
I was kind of curious, like when you were kind of playing with USD and using it in your work, if you ran into problems with it or something that was USD related, were there resources that you kind of commonly look to kind of answer questions, or are there resources that you wish you had that would have helped kind of that make that a little bit easier?
I think USD compared to other sources has a really good README and like documentation for robotics side. So I really enjoy like just having that like full on documentation. Usually because the USD has like a good partnership with the software companies that they're building with, their official documentation is really good. What I would hope to have is like this like community that I would like debug together, where I would have like very specific niche problems that like I recently faced. I had to import USDZ into an XML file format because it was the only file format that I can see described in Visual Code. Like those small issues, I'm sure that other people who use USD have already faced and know how like know that like one small thing that you can change and it'll get fixed. So like a community-based problem solving.
Yeah, just to add to Anna's point, I think it's quite similar. Basically, I think, and also to Bami's point from the other question, I feel like USD itself is great. It's just that the community at the moment is quite like small. So I think, like the connectors and third parties, like people start to adopt this technology, but at the same time, you still need to kind of push them to use it more. So it's I wish there were more, like how I discovered Blender, for example. It was through YouTube tutorials, and that's how I, started getting really, really excited about this because it was free and accessible and easy, like quick to grasp. So I think if there's any way to promote USD through, I don't know, maybe like content creators who are creating tutorials for new people or maybe advanced professionals, I think that will be a great start because as Anna mentioned, documentation is already like great. And yeah, I think it needs a really strong community of makers and creators. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I also want to say like, yeah, the presentations were super awesome and really inspiring to me. So yeah, thank you for presenting today.
Yeah, sort of a follow-up. I kept thinking of like how you tackled how you all tackled what I think from my point of view as a non-programmer and uh, pretty large problems. So I felt like it feels like you had a good support structure to move through solving the problems. And I do agree, like building community is a great thing. This is a good example of that, and how to build energy around that. Yes, you can do this. And what are the people's fears about trying new things that, you sort of step right through, it seems.
Yeah, sometimes honestly, it's not even like I feel like especially artists, a lot of the times I can speak from my perspective, but when you step into this new kind of part of creativity, and if you're already very skilled at something, you feel very vulnerable to be a noob at something, to not know something. So for me, for example, that was like coding or Omniverse, which I've never like ever opened before. So I think in this case, it was also that both Perry and Kat, they brought really, really great professionals from the industry who also shared their insights and their knowledge and their tips on how they use the specific softwares in their approach. So, we can have a great example, but also we can kind of get stuck together and just maybe stay a bit like 30 minutes after work and just kind of debug together with that digital twin project. Me and Una kind of exchanged knowledge because she created a great system on how the character can recognize audio and interact with me, and I taught her some like Blender stuff and particles. So it was always like about exchanging the knowledge, both from like within our group, but also like from external like professionals too.
Yeah, and I would say one of the challenges of USD is how big and small it is at the same time. It's like HTML. You sort of go to clients and say, this thing is transformational, and everyone in your company is going to be using it. It's going to be like the new internet. And they're like, it's like, how do we make it happen? And you're like, well, 100,000 people have to adopt something in a certain way. And they go, that is just like, we'll wait for it to become like the internet then. And like this is a marathon, USD, right? It's a 10-15 year marathon, and in 10 years time we'll have meetings where we ever wondered why we thought about adoption, because everyone just uses it. And I think in that scenario what you get is a lot of very, very senior people and very important companies saying, look, it's obvious this is the way it should work. And a lot of sort of junior or sort of more mainstream workers at the organization going, well, it doesn't work for me for this reason, or I don't want to use it for this reason, or and I think that's one of the interesting things we face, right? Like on paper, it makes sense for car companies to have a single digital twin that goes from one end right the way out to the adverts. But in reality, in an organization like Ford or Toyota or JLR, like our clients, there are many reasons why it doesn't look like that. And it actually takes the curiosity and the passion of the team here to help drive those things through. And I think it's also important that you have that grassroots community, sort of aspect to it. It can't be a bunch of very senior people going, this is how our company and industry should operate. You need to win over the artists and the engineers, and and that's the way to make it happen. It's a very grassroots, bottom up technology USD we found. And we've tried, we've gone in and pitched it to CIOs and CTOs and CMOs, and they absolutely love it. But you're asking thousands of people to change the way they work. And that's you really have to sort of show them. It's different. You can't mandate USD very easily, we found.
I think that you might have tapped into something that I think is important in this context, and that is that a lot of the knowledge base is in these traditional sectors. But I really believe what we're talking about and what I saw today was this influx of new ideas and new ways of mashing things up that a top-down kind of thinking might not have allowed. Like this experimentation. I mentioned the word joyful. It's really fun to be on the cutting edge and discover something or put two pieces together that didn't exist before creatively. So, I think how to let people know there's like new opportunities to create things tell stories, and take advantage of the core technology. So you tapped into this today. It was really interesting to see because it's like I see it, but I might not be the one doing it.
Yeah.
I might not have the bandwidth, but there's people like I just saw like the Sims thing was really and telling your stories was really valuable. I wish I had more people from my team on the call today because that's the fun aspect of this is taking your interests and pushing through the technology to achieve something or learn something. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, this is ironically the best time for junior talent. Not that you're junior now, guys, because you've launched the TPU and Nano Banana. Just like can't really call you junior if you're doing that. But like, there's a big narrative at the moment around how hard it is to get a job coming out of college or, what you should tell your kids to do. And I think what we've proved with this program is that actually the opposite of that is true right now. Like this is the most amazing time for AI native talent coming into the industry because they are excited by these tools, they connect them in new ways, they haven't taught themselves habits that they don't want to let go. And that's a big thing that we've learned here that actually whatever it says in the news right now is an amazing time to go out and hire some new people. Like it's genuinely worked for us.
That's a great place to end, and I'm just going to pop up a slide if you would like to keep the conversation going. Would love to have you in our DEI interest group. So it's open to everyone at any membership level. I don't know. Can you see the screen? Okay, right. You do have to be, for those of you watching on YouTube, you do have to be a member of the AOUSD first, but if you just email operations@aousd.org, Melissa can walk you through the process. Our meetings are the first Friday of the month at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And if you want to take a look at what we're working on, you are an AOUSD member, we have our welcome page and the AOUSD all shared drive, and you can see where we're at on certain initiatives. So great. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to Perry and to the marketing team and to Melissa for helping facilitate. So
thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.